hit the button. Welcome to the EMN podcast, where philosophy meets disaster and uncomfortable truths meet the profession we call emergency management. This is not safe space thinking. This is the arena. Let's begin. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine world. And well, Andrew and I are here, and we're going to start talking about, Garden Grove and the incident that occurred with a runaway. The only best way I can describe it is a runaway chemical reaction that they don't know exactly how it started, but potentially could have created some serious issues if the fire department didn't do a heroic job of cooling down that chemical. Basically, the dispo of it is it gelled up at the bottom, taking away the explosive properties of it, and pretty much the gas off as well. And it happened in Garden Grove, California. And I'll bring up to speed from what I understand. Most of what I'm telling you is I'm getting from just local news information. I don't have any inside information on it when it comes to why it started. So evidently on Wednesday night into Thursday morning, there was a gas off of the chemical. The company somebody called 911, went over there. It was thought to be stable. The next morning, they looked at it and said, "Oh no, it's not stable. We need to evacuate." And evacuate they did. Around 50,000 residents were evacuated out of this Garden Grove, Stanton, Anaheim, that area in South Garden Grove, off the 22 freeway, which really kind of would impact. There's a whole bunch of impacts on this. I started looking at it professionally speaking, not just watching the news, because one of the organizations I work for, the Diocese of Orange, not the Archdiocese, the Diocese of Orange, was impacted. We had to evacuate one of our churches and also the cathedral itself. Although outside of the impact zone, we have a lot of parishioners that live in the impact zone, so we started looking at that, and that's how I got brought into the conversation. And so I had started looking at a lot of different things, made a few incident reports based upon the information that was there. And again, I did not directly speak to anybody involved in the response, although I do know people that were involved in the response and also involved in on the government side on the evacuation. So that's kind of bringing up to speed. Did I miss anything, Andrew? Anything I need to add to that? Or?
No, I think that's a fairly accurate sort of assessment of what happened. I mean, without getting into some of the nitty gritty in terms of in the details there. My understanding was that there was a problem with the valves that they needed in order to release the pressure and then to cool things down. And the temperature increase within those tanks was getting to a point where it was dangerous. And that chemical compound, methylcrylate, is highly flammable and explosive. And I think if I remember correctly, you've got sort of the take on the sort of measure of that in terms of force. And I think some historical references. I'll let you go ahead and we could discuss that aspect in terms of the potential impact that this could have.
So just to kind of put this in perspective as far as what the chemical was, it's, from what I understand, it's pretty much an adhesive that they use to make polymer windows for fighter aircraft and also the aircraft that you fly on a daily basis, just the Boeing, or whatever you're flying, the windows that are next to you when you're looking out to see the beautiful view from your thing. So they make those that's what they make with this chemical compound, or at least a part of that chemical compound is involved in that. So and yeah, you're right. From what I understand, the valve at the bottom got gummed up with the polymer, with the glue that was there. So it kind of makes sense. So the blast radius that they're looking, they're using the Hopkins-Carson scale distance approach. That's what they're using that. And so the tank normally holds at full capacity is 34,000 gallons. And although The good thing is it was already reduced down to about 7,000 gallons, as OCFA cited, and it was starting to boil. Basically, it was needs to stay below 60 degrees, so they want best is in the 50s, like 50 in the low 50s, where I like to keep it. But 60 is stable. This was, and at 100 degrees, there's a high chance of a levee. So just kind of put that in perspective. At 400 degrees, which it would have basically exploded. So kind of these are the numbers that were being given out. So let's talk about worst case scenario first. Worst case scenario, if it was a full tank, it's 121,000 kilograms of liquid mass. That's a 55,400 kilograms of cloud mass, the equivalent of 17.6 tons of TNT. And Andrew, did you fact check me on what Hiroshima was? From my understanding, it was 20 tons, but it could have been less.
I did not, but let me do the quick arithmetic on that.
Okay.
I'm gonna say it's around 15 kilotons of TNT.
Okay, so you're looking at a Hiroshima style explosive. Now, mind you, the Hiroshima bomb was an air blast, and so there's some of those things, but still, that's a pretty significant blast. Well, the good thing is we didn't have to worry about that because they already had down to 7,000 gallons. But what does that mean? That's 24,900 kilograms of liquid mass, 11,400 kilograms of cloud mass, and that was 3.6 tons of TNT equivalency if that blew. Now, if it levied, which actually was a little bit less of an issue, you're still talking about 0.6 tons of TNT blast. So the radius that they gave, and you can see if we look at the news, there's some images of the blast radius. You're looking at a significant damage radius. And I know for the people who were evacuated, and for those that are don't understand what's happening, it may have been like, oh, we evacuated for no particular reason. You gotta understand that the Orange County Fire Authority did a heroic job of getting in there and cooling that tank down and putting men and women in harm's way as they were doing this. And then what they did also is they waited till the evening when it was cooler, and we had the weather on our side, by the way. It was a very cool week. If it was today, for instance, it's a little warmer here where I live. I live about around 12 miles away from where this occurred. Sorry about my dog there. Going into that, it would have been significant. And I was telling my wife, and we are kind of planning for the fact. I said, look, if that blows, we're going to hear it up here. I don't think we'd feel it here, but we definitely hear it because I can hear and see the Disneyland fireworks, to put that perspective, every night at 9:30. So it's like, oh, boom, boom, boom. Oh, it's 9:30, right? So the sound travels. So it would have been significant enough for us to be able to see it. From where I live, looking west, we were able to see the visual. It was at nighttime of when the El Segundo Chevron explosion occurred, and we saw the big firebomb, and that's 35 miles away. So vision. So this is kind of giving you an idea of what I can see from my house because I'm up in elevation. So we would have seen or heard that. So the people who were evacuated, and if you're listening to this, and I had friends of mine, by the way, at least 10 people who I know that were evacuated. Tim Tran, who's an emergency manager for the city of Gardena, he was evacuated. I had some friends that work with me over at the diocese who were evacuated. A fire station that was located within the area could not be returned to. Police officers that work for Garden Grove PD that live in the area were evacuated. So it was, somebody, when you live here, you knew somebody who was impacted by this event. So this was something that wasn't just something we saw on TV. It was something that we were looking at closely for that week. So yes, that evacuation was impactful. little bit more on the evacuation. We've all stood up shelters of some point, right? I know Andrew, you worked during Hurricane Sandy and a couple other larger events like this, and the population in most of the time, the population in evacuation centers are very. I don't know, my thumb went up. It's crazy. What in evacuation centers are low, right?
Yep.
They had full evacuation centers throughout, and
Yep.
so much so that Orange County had to open up additional evacuation shelters. I forget how many. I think there was like 6 or 7 evacuation centers eventually open at some level that were full. And they would pop up, say, "Hey, there's another evacuation center," and then like an hour later, say, "Hey, sorry, this is full." Hotels are full. I mean, 50,000 people. Just kind of put that. That's bigger than some cities. You know.
Yep.
So kind of put that. Like the city I worked for. At one point was 25,000 people. So that's a complete evacuation of a city. So that's the information I have. So go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, I want to step back just a moment just to give
Sure.
folks a perspective a little bit on this historical perspective. Most folks may be saying, well, how bad could this be? Some of the worst industrial accidents that have happened usually at port cities, and they usually involve, the types of ammonium nitrate that's used for fertilizer and things like that. If folks remember the port accident that took place in Lebanon, was a huge. I mean, it was equivalent of like an atomic bomb. I mean, it just leveled certain parts of Beirut, and that was I don't know 4 or 5, 6 years ago or so. There have been accidents of that type before. 1917, the Halifax accident that took place, that was 2.9 kilotons of TNT equivalent, 1,782 deaths, and 9,000 non-fatal injuries. So incredible. Within the United States, the worst industrial accident, at least recorded, was the Texas City explosion that took place in 1947. That was the equivalent of 1.5 kilotons, and that killed roughly about 581 people and 5,000 non-fatal injuries. So and Todd, just for our listening audience, or for myself, how many potential kilotons of TNT were we talking about that was in that tank that could have
with an explosion? It was 3 point. Hang on, let me pull up so I give you the exact number. It was 3.6 tons of TNT equivalent.
3.6. Okay, and with a population that's densely populated around that area, or I mean, we're talking about potential thousands of folks that could have been, could have died as a result of an explosion of that sort. So yes, evacuating 50,000 people, terrible, but something that was necessary. And just to pivot a little bit in terms of the number of shelters, and I think the strain that presents, we're talking about there were about 8 official, or roughly somewhere between 8 to 10 official evacuation shelters or emergency shelters that were set up. Many of those by Red Cross. There were some facilities that were set up for overage, but I think this is the thing. There's a strain in the capacity when you have a no notice or low notice event of that sort. This is a no notice event, I think, if we look at this. But from the stories that were described, folks had 20 minutes to gather their belongings and to evacuate. That's what they were told. And so folks needed to scramble to find space where they could shelter from this type of hazard.
I think showing this map right here, and on the other side of it too, if it levied, that would have, it would have been a little bit lower on the TNT scale, so it would have been like 0.6 tons, still significant. So in the idea of the explosion, which is really going to sound weird, that the levy was probably the best outcome that if it did explode. And this gives you that's kind of where they're leaning towards. So this gives you an idea of what the blast radius would have looked like with a BLEVE, not necessarily an explosion. This was in the LA Times map. This is the map that the county shared with everyone. So if you take a look at that map, and if for those that are listening, you can find this information pretty much if you just Google blast radius for the Garden Grove. You can find this information pretty readily available. But I mean, it's significant, right? So you're looking at anything outside that last yellow line here. It says light damage blast zone, but that could have gone further than this. This was at the minimum light damage. So this light damage area could have gone anywhere within in the evacuation zone, pretty much. So with the reverberation, and we know from West Texas, we know from Halifax, we know from Beirut. Think about the Beirut bomb, not Beirut bombing, but the Beirut explosion
Right.
Was
I think it was ammonium nitrate.
Ammonium nitrate, yeah, it was ammonium nitrate, correct, right? So those industrial accidents, it was inconvenient. It was a bad timing. It was on Memorial Day weekend. It was when people wanted to be with their families and loved ones and have enjoy that long weekend. And yes, I get it, and I get why people are frustrated. But now let's do some Monday morning quarterbacking here.
One thing I do want to say, and I want to give a shout out to the folks, and this is something that I teach in my disaster preparedness and crisis management course. And you can course correct me on this, Todd. And that's the leadership. That's the thing. The folks who made the right call. Get these people out of harm's way. And to me, that is there are folks, and the mistake can be made sometimes where folks try to it's that optimism bias. Okay, well, no, it's not so bad. We don't want to disturb people. It's almost like the scene in Jaws where the mayor on the beach and says, oh, we don't want to disturb people. It's a holiday weekend. People need to be happy and enjoy themselves, and let's not interrupt their festivities. No, if lives are at stake, you need to take that leadership. The call was correct. The moves were correct. Yes, it's a strain on the capacity. It's horrible that people needed to do it, but absolutely the right call. So, and I know folks are going to be called on the carpet, but I think better to be called on the carpet for making this call and saving lives from a potential hazard than something really horrible happening based upon what we know could have happened. So,
and I'll tell you this much, okay, so just for full disclosure, there is some personal bias here as well. Looking at people who I know running the incident that I know that are great. TJ, the fire chief, TJ McGovern, the fire chief or the interim fire chief for Orange County Fire Authority. I knew him back. We just got promoted to fire captain for the Garden Grove Fire Department when Garden Grove was their own fire department. So Garden Grove had the best person at the helm of this event because he grew up in his fire service in that city and understood it, right? There's no way that they're making decisions that are going to be based upon on that's going to hurt the residents of Garden Grove. And again, I understand that people are upset. I understand that people are frustrated because they are out of their home. Now you can take that frustration out on the chemical plant for sure. But to put that in perspective as well, and this is a whole nother thing that we can whole nother conversation, but that plant, although has changed hands over the years, has been there since 1963 on a 15-acre plot of land. Why they allowed building of homes and businesses around that plant, I think is an interesting conversation that we could have later, but they do. And one of the community members was asking the question of like, how many other plants are here that have these dangerous chemicals?
Yeah,
I'll tell you this much, that knowing that UPS and FedEx ships some of the most explosives from any shipping company. Now, not in all one package or whatnot, but they have batteries that and all sorts of chemicals that they ship under the DOT placarding rules, right? But the thing is, it's multiple boxes of things. So any of those, I'm not saying that they're all full of them, but as a concept here, any one of those could have an issue. They catch on fire and things like this, right? So there's chemicals that are driving on our freeways every single day, and especially the 22 that goes through Garden Grove and that. So I mean, like we have danger. The point about it is that we have dangerous things that are driving through our neighborhoods and around our neighborhoods on a regular basis. So to be mad at one chemical, no, yes, I know there's going to be lawsuits. There's going to be things that are happening. I'm not saying there shouldn't be, but my point about it is to start like looking at chemical plants from around your town. Like you can then need to look at also the gas station that's next door to you, or the garage, the service garage that's next door to you. There's all sorts of bad stuff that's out there, right?
Yeah,
And
I agree. But one thing I'll argue though, and that is there's scale of risk. And so the scale of this risk is a pretty severe one, and especially in residential area that and we just saw that with the evacuation orders and getting people out. Yeah, that's prudence, in practice to make sure that you're getting people out of harm's way. But I think it's a valid question to to argue, and that is that, or and that is it safe to habitate certain areas? Now, what does that mean for that company in terms of relocation, in terms of safeguards? The fact that these valves are not working properly, those are kinds of the precautions that we expect to be taken care of, and for your regulators to make sure. And this is part of the issue around how effective is that regulation in maintaining safety for the public.
Oh, by no means, by the way, am I defending that company. I don't want that to. I don't think those are that words or concept is coming off my lips. What I'm saying is when we take a look at a community, we can't plan for every single hazard. That was kind of my point what I was trying to make. But I mean, it's just gonna. We live in a high risk world right now. Again, my thumb goes up. I don't get this like.
One thing I will say, just to sort of progress this beyond, and I know we're a little time constrained today, just because we're recording on a weekend here, and that is I think, and this goes to sort of where we are right now in terms of our overall emergency management stance and our sort of risk understanding. And I think the public needs to understand this stuff is real. Like when
Right.
you're told to make sure that you have a go bag and evacuation plan, this isn't fantasy land. This is true. This can happen to you. This can happen to you. I live in New Jersey, and I realize that we live in a beautiful area. However, we live near a forested area. If there's severe drought over a period of time, you could be at risk for wildfire. We don't talk about it because we don't experience wildfires like you do out west. But that reality is present, is a lot more present than we realize. We do have tornadoes on occasion, in not necessarily in this area. We're not like Tornado Alley, but we have them from time to time
Right.
here. So that severe weather that we need to sort of think about, and the risks that we have, right? And as you just pointed out, just because you're not near a chemical plant doesn't mean you can't have a chemical tanker basically have an accident and be exposed to that and be told, look, you need to get the hell out of Dodge here in 5 minutes. Get in your car, grab your go bag, and get going. So again, this is stuff that I think is true to our hearts. But what do you do when you need to then get out of your home and evacuate? Do you have that plan? Is it actually operational? That's one aspect. And I think the other aspect is, as a community, are we ready to be able to receive folks when there is an evacuation? Are we able to take in folks? Because I'm reading about the Elks Lodge. I applaud them that they opened up their doors and they welcomed people, and they had folks who were pitching tents there, and they provided support. They're not set up as an emergency shelter. And so maybe they had some plans around that. Something I'd like to explore and find out a little bit more about down the road here. The point that I want to make is that as a society and in our communities, we need to think about these things, because 50,000 people, just a quick arithmetic on that. If let's say the maximum facility, average shelter space is about 250 people that
Right.
it can accommodate. Maximum 500. 500 is what they consider a mega shelter in the Red Cross. And I'll tell you, I've worked shelters upwards of 3,000 people here in the New York City area. That's a lot of people to host, and it's a lot to manage. Let's just do the quick arithmetic and say it's 500 per shelter. That's, we're talking about on the order of 100 shelters to have. That's just
Right.
not. It's just the staffing required to stand up 100 shelters is just not there among the Red Cross. Now, I'd like to have someone from the Red Cross on the show at some point to talk about the capacity limits, but that means municipalities, that means communities need to think and to plan for this when something like this happens, whether it's wildfire, whether it's a chemical leak, or chemical, incident, or any type of thing where it's low notice, no notice, that they need to then stand them up so that we have capacity. Yes, folks should go to family and friends when they can, but that's not always the reality.
Right. I mean, Tim stayed with his parents' house. A couple other people that I know that evacuate stay with family. Some stay at a hotel. But some people don't have the means to stay at a hotel.
That's right.
I mean, they get expensive quickly. You think $100 a night is, not a big deal, but the next thing you know, it's we're doing the math for other things. You can get into the tens of thousands of dollars pretty quickly if you can't go back to your house within a.
And there are many families, to be quite frank, who I saw in the reports and news that I read. These are vulnerable families. They're not making a lot of money. They're getting by. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And as we know, people are a lot more vulnerable now. Gas prices have gone up. People are paying more for groceries and other expenses. So they're not able to withstand these kinds of disruptions and calls to evacuate. It's a game of musical chairs. They cannot find the space that's available. So I think we need to think about, we have, we say this a lot, we have the resources, they're just not organized appropriately. So I think we need to focus about that and think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is we're going to learn more about this. We're going to look at the after action on this. I'm going to commend the response from the fire and law enforcement that were out they put themselves in harm's way for the people. I'm also going to the work that Garden Grove Emergency Management, Anaheim, the LA or Orange County Emergency Management did on this. I think it was fantastic. The Red Cross, all the work that they put onto it. From I was going to say it was Monday morning quarterback this here for a second, but my point about it was I don't think that we're going to find very much fault, if any, in anything that they did. Right. Frustrating where, for the people because they weren't in their home, but God forbid that something went sideways. And we lost people because we weren't being, I say the collective we, right? The community, society wasn't being proactive and protective. And then, they would have been having another conversation. So I don't think you're going to see too many people that are going to find fault at anything that that the Orange County Fire Authority and Orange County Office of Emergency Management and, did on this activity. But, like I said, I'm biased. These people who I know, and I know they're professional and they have the best interest of the community at heart.
I think Craig Fugate says it well. And that is, you're going to be called to a hearing, whether you made the right choice and were proactive and expended resources, or you're going to be, called into a hearing because you made the poor choices. This is a case where I first of all, again, I want to say we're not here to question or to criticize folks for the actions. I think they took the right actions. I think, they took the right measures. A very tough situation to get 50,000 people out of harm's way. Call was correct, and luckily, no one was hurt and no one was killed in this incident. So it was great as far as that response is concerned. But yes, there's a lot to learn from this, and I think there's a lot of takeaways for other parts of our country for these types of things that happen. Because we can think about the East Palestine, derailment of those chemical tankers and the impact that had in that community and things of that sort. We're in that situation as a society, and we need to plan for it effectively.
Oddly enough, just not too long ago, I put this put this in perspective, there was a Washington State paper mill had their pulp, one of the pulp tanks, which is a chemical tank, implode, and right now they just recovered 7 or 9 bodies.
Yeah, it's
and now we're talking on the opposite of that is a very similar situation with families that are no longer with their loved ones.
Yeah.
I can't say more about it as far as what they did. We got lucky, I think. The air temperature was in our favor. They were able to cool the outside of the tank down, and eventually cool it down enough to where the chemical, it seems like from what reports say, it looks like it gelled or coagulated at least at the bottom of the tank, so that took away that explosive. And man, I could tell you, I could see in their faces and in their words and in their actions how relieved everybody was when they were able to report that, and how relieved they were when they told the people of Garden Grove and Stanton and Anaheim they could go home again.
Yep.
And was it inconvenient? Absolutely. But did they do the right thing? I'll stand by them.
And I think there's still 16,000 people that are still waiting. If I understand correctly, that are
maybe that number. Yeah, and I think it's a totally. I don't know. I have to look at the
60,000 that still that had evacuated that were not necessarily ready to return. Now they may be returning, now, but that this still may not be over for some folks until it gets fully. I think it's now recognized as sort of been under control at this point. So,
yeah. All right, Andrew. Well, we both got to get rolling here, and it's always great to see you. Great conversation. To the men and women of Orange County Fire Authority and the law enforcement that was out there during those times, thank you for the work that you guys put into it. For my friends and colleagues with Orange County Office of Emergency Management, with Garden Grove and Anaheim, you guys did a stand-up job. And normally I'm not one to try to cheerlead anybody, but I had to cheerlead them. And so congratulations on saving lives. And even though if the community might be mad at us, I say us because I'll put me in that. Those of us that do this for a living, and we got your back. Andrew, I'll let you say the last word.
Yeah, I'll just also, I just want to second what you just said, and also just call out Cal OES and the governor's office, because they did declare an emergency as well for this. So, when we talk about whole of government, yes, it starts locally. They made the response. They got, but the whole system actually worked well to address this effectively. So I also want to give them a shout out as well, because sometimes they're not, sort of in the equation on this. So, and also the folks in the Red Cross, because
yes.
They're doing, I know that work, setting up those shelters and, comforting people and doing that work. And the folks who are not necessarily, the folks who volunteered, who came out to help and things like that. Great work. Uber, Del Taco, there's a whole, it's like, I don't want to sound like the Academy Awards. I want to thank all they did. It's the community there. Folks came out to help. And that's what helped to make sure that people were received and felt that they had a place to go to, and they were able to get back home. So
yeah, Team Rubicon got involved and did some shelter operations.
Yep.
John Rose and Cheryl Jones from Cal OES. I'm sorry I didn't mention it myself, but you guys led a great team from Cal OES, and Michelle Anderson did a great job with Orange County. So we're gonna throw names out there too. So this is we're talking to our peers here with this podcast and video cast, and so I just want to make sure that they get the credit and that they deserve. All right, well, until next time, everybody, stay safe, stay hydrated.
When the sirens scream out loud, we're the voice that breaks the cloud. Heads out high when things go wrong. We'll guide you through with strength and song. Disaster strikes without a sound. Chaos reigns, but we're around. Public safety in our hands. Steady, strong, every laugh.